Colorful text over images of past events. Logo, Illinois Cultural Accessibility Network. Professional Development Workshops. Accessibility Compliance for Grantees. Black text on white background showing title above his ICAN logo. At top right, mini video of speaker Hillary Pearson.
Let's get started. Today, we're going to be talking about accessibility when it comes to grant applications. Thank you so much for being here. We're very excited today to have a lovely panel lined up of some top-notch experts from around the country to talk about accessibility compliance with grants and funding. First and foremost, I want to introduce our ICAN team and what we do. So ICAN is the Illinois Cultural Accessibility Network. We are affiliated with the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium and also are generously supported by a grant and funding and support from the Illinois Arts Council Agency. My name is Hillary Pearson. I am on the team for ICAN as well as a steering committee member of CCAC. I am a early 30s white woman with brown hair wearing a purple and black top, seated in front of a burgundy wall here in my home in Oak Park, Illinois. And what ICAN is a group that is really geared towards connecting Illinois-based arts and cultural institutions with access resources, networking, and professional development. So we're very new to the landscape of Illinois, and we're very happy to have done one program in the fall, and now this is our second program. So we're excited for folks to be here. And if you're new, please connect with us. We'll be able to share ways to connect with us, with you all throughout and after the program. Now I want to transition to our speakers. We are our first speaker today is Peter Berg. Peter Berg is the project coordinator of technical assistance at Great Lakes ADA, and he's going to talk to us today about the ADA, why it's integral to what's needed for funding, and what cultural organizations should be thinking about when they're making internal audits of access. So with that, I will let Peter take it away.
Slide show black text on white background. At top left corner is Great Lakes ADA logo. Text, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA. Peter Berg, Great Lakes ADA Center, University of Illinois, Chicago.
All right, thank you very much, Hillary, and very pleased to have been asked and pleased to be here with you today. I am broadcasting from an undisclosed location in my residence in lovely Naperville, Illinois. I am a white male, and I recently ordered three sweaters online. So I think I'm wearing the navy one today. If it's not navy, then it's black, and if it's not black, it's rust. And if it's not one of those colors, I need to talk to the people I ordered this from. So I am in my home work location. Out of camera shot is my my nearly 3-year-old black Labrador Lloyd, who is keeping me company. He is my guide dog. I am blind, and I am using screen reader technology to interact with my computer today and be able to provide today's presentation. So that's why I have a set of headphones and earbud in my right ear so I can hear what is going on. The Great Lakes ADA Center is housed in Chicago at the University of Illinois, Chicago. The Great Lakes Center, as well as the New England ADA Center, where our next speaker, Kathy Gips, is from, are both part of the federally funded ADA National Network. There are 10 regional ADA centers across the country. Our role is to provide guidance, training, and material on the Americans with Disabilities Act. The network is a great resource to get training, to find out, to ask questions about and understanding your obligations under the ADA without fear of being turned in or getting in trouble. We answer questions, and that's what we're funded to do. We're here to help you understand the requirements of the ADA. So that's what I'm going to walk us through today. All right, I am on to slide 3, please, Kathy. And looking at the purpose of the ADA. Prior to the passage of the ADA, there were several laws that had come prior to that, but there were still areas of society where people could be excluded solely on the basis of having a disability. And that included employment, full access to programs and services of state and local governments, private businesses, telecommunication, and transportation. So the ADA is designed to end that segregation that had taken place for decades and decades, and aid in the integration into these areas of society of people with disabilities. And probably most importantly is to provide an equal opportunity. The ADA doesn't provide doesn't provide better benefits, or you don't have to do additional things, for people with disabilities. Well, and we're going to talk about in a little bit of why you may have an obligation to provide a sign language interpreter. That's not some type of better benefit or requirement under the ADA. That is intended so that a person that's deaf or hard of hearing, someone that requires American Sign Language, has an equal opportunity to access information that is being provided. So the ADA is all about opportunity. It doesn't require that someone with a disability have the same outcome as other people, because you don't guarantee that for anyone. The ADA requires equal opportunity, that someone with a disability has the same opportunity to come in and benefit from the cultural experience that your organization is making available to the public. Slide 4, talking about the ADA and the civil rights perspective. This past last July in 2020, during the midst of the pandemic, we celebrated the 30th anniversary of the signing of the ADA. And even going back 5 years before that, most people know the acronym ADA. And it's not like when I first started at Great Lakes, or when Kathy, first started with the New England ADA Center, where we get calls and, is this the American Dairy Dietitian Diabetes Association? People know what, the acronym ADA is. And that's a good thing. People have become knowledgeable through media, through experiences of having a family member, a friend, be a person with a disability. But it also in some ways has lost the context of the ADA being a civil rights law. In some regards, ADA has become synonymous with everything disability and accessibility. And that's not the case. The ADA doesn't apply everywhere, and everything that may happen to someone with a disability isn't discrimination. Every bad thing that happens to someone with a disability isn't discrimination. A lot of contexts, that parking lot's not ADA. My cousin's on ADA at work. Building code officials will oftentimes talk about ADA when they're really talking about accessibility requirements under a building code. So it's important to remember and look back at the ADA in that context, that when Congress was considering passing the ADA in the 80s, and when it was finally done in 1990, it was an extension of the Civil Rights Act. So it was designed to end the years of people being segregated, separated solely on the basis of having a disability. We frequently hear businesses, employers, institutions talk about diversity, and disability is not always part of that discussion, but it should be. Disability is part of diversity. It's part of what a large segment of the population, are people with disabilities. And then there's also the financial, context. When we talk about people with disabilities have money to spend, they have money to come out and access and use and participate in the cultural offerings that your organization is making available. On to slide 5, when we talk about the number of people with disabilities, we're talking about the largest minority group in the United States. The 2010 census, about 18% of individuals in the United States are people with disabilities. We just finished the 2020 census. We'll get those numbers out, sometime later this year. And expectation is that the number of people with disabilities is going to have increased in the past decade. One of the reasons that we know this is happening is because of the aging of the baby boom generation. Aging disability is part of the natural aging process. As people get older, they acquire disabilities. People don't see as well, hear as well. Their dexterity, their mobility, their agility is not the same as they get into their late 60s, 70s, 80s as it is when they're in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. Excuse me. And one of the things that I find interesting about this and something that may have an impact on the programs and services that you make available is that individuals who acquire a disability as part of the aging process aren't necessarily going to identify as having a disability, but they're still going to have the same functional needs as someone that does identify as having a disability. And I don't know the answer to this issue, but you may have situations where when you identify something as being for people with disabilities or it's required by the ADA, you may have someone who's older and would benefit from an assistive listening device, so that they can better hear what is being said within your program or activity. But if it's identified as being for people with disabilities, they may be less likely or not want to have that because they don't identify as having a disability. Whereas someone that's younger may have acquired a disability at birth or acquired it at a younger age, may readily identify and say, yes, I need an assistive listening device. I need that device in order to be able to fully participate in this program, this activity. So something just to keep in mind of how you make available wording is important as you let people know about the features, the communication availability that you have for your patrons and participants. Slide 6, just quickly looking at the breakdown of the categories of types of disabilities. Around 16% of people with disabilities are individuals that use mobility devices. So individuals, despite 30 years of the ADA, still encounter difficulties in some areas in terms of architectural barriers and ability to fully participate because of physical barriers. About 50% of people with disabilities are individuals with sensory disabilities, so individuals who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, or who have low vision. And about a third of people with disabilities are individuals with major significant medical conditions. And the majority of disability is not visible. So oftentimes, you can look at someone and not know that that individual is a person with a disability. All right, next slide, slide number 7. Requirements for your cultural institutions. What do you need to do with regards to the ADA and ensuring that people with disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate? And looking at communication, which I mentioned, modification, doing things differently, again, to provide that equal opportunity for people to participate. And then architectural access, removing physical barriers that prevent people from disabilities from getting into your facilities. On to slide 8. When we talk about Title II of the ADA, we're talking about state and local government. So some of you out there may be an instrument of local government or even state government. And what we're talking about here is if you're funding, basically if you operate on tax revenues, your organization has the ability to generate and collect tax revenue. You would be considered a local government entity. And this portion of the ADA covers all aspects of state and local governments. All instruments, all ordinances, all rules fall under the requirements of the ADA. Slide 9 is the overarching obligation under Title II of the ADA. And you may hear this, and we'll hear this going forward, is the idea, the concept of program access, meaning that all the programs, activities, services that you offer as a government entity must be accessible to and usable by persons with disabilities. That's the overarching requirement for everything that state and local governments do. And when you think about the programs, activities, and services that you're providing, they must be available in the most integrated setting. So program access, full integration should be the starting point. Now, in existing buildings, that may not be possible, but that should be the starting point. So you may have, you may operate a historic building. It's a home that has this historical significance, and there are features in the second level of that home that are important. They provide relevant information as to why that's a historical home. That, you know, the starting point when you look at making that program accessible should be getting people up to that second level. Now, it may not be possible structurally. It may not be feasible to get people up to that second level, but that should be your starting point. You may wind up having to provide videos and descriptions and text, audio descriptions of what is located on that second level. But from the outset, the objective should be full integration and getting people to that location. Majority of you are probably fall under Title III of the ADA, which covers places of public accommodation. And Title III, prohibits private businesses, whether for-profit, nonprofit, from discriminating on the basis of disability, excluding people solely on the basis of their disability. Slide 11. Here you see the 12 categories of what are considered places of public accommodation. This list is exhaustive, but the examples of what is considered a place of public accommodation is non-exhaustive within these examples. So basically, if you're a non-government entity, you're open to the public. The public is welcome to come in and access your programs and services, whether you charge for that or not. You're likely considered a place of public accommodation and subject to Title III of the ADA. All right, slide 12, looking at the requirements for effective communication. This specifically applies to individuals with sensory disabilities, so persons who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, low vision, and individuals with speech disabilities. Providing an equal opportunity for persons to access the information that you're providing, whether that is information that's being provided orally, visually, that persons with sensory disabilities have an opportunity to access that information. And in some instances, that's going to require you to provide what the law refers to as auxiliary aids and services. So what are examples? Well, we have a couple of really good examples as part of today's webinar. We have sign language interpreters, and we have captioning that is being provided, and those are examples of ways to communicate with individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing. For individuals who are blind, low vision, we would be talking about things such as audio description for live events that are taking place, providing materials in alternative formats. In many instances, we've gone to providing information material electronically, but some cultural venues still provide print brochures or print materials regarding their events, and there may be an obligation to provide that information in Braille or in a format that is accessible to and usable by someone with a disability. The cost of providing auxiliary aids and services, is that of the cultural institution. You can't charge a person for a disability to cover the cost of auxiliary aids and services. You can certainly place a charge on the price of all tickets or the price of admission for everyone entering the venue, and you can use that as your, the budget to cover when you get requests for auxiliary aids and services. But the responsibility for the cost is that of the venue. Something that some of the members of CCAC do is when they have events taking place, they select dates where they will provide and advertise that they're going to have an interpreter available or captioning or provide audio description for this particular performance. And that's a great way for those of you just getting into, this of reaching out to the disability community to be able to say, yes, we're planning a performance on this Sunday, and we're going to provide American Sign Language interpreters, and we're going to have captioning for this performance. And the following weekend, we're going to provide audio description. Does that mean that meets all your obligations for auxiliary aids and services? No. You may have someone they can't attend on that particular day, or they don't want to go on that day. And so they may contact you and say, I want audio description for this performance, or I need sign language interpreter for this performance. But it's a great way to reach out to the community and to be able to advertise to the disability community and specific disability groups. As someone who's blind and uses audio description, I'm a big fan of this. I'm on the mailing list, for example, for the Chicago Shakespeare Theater. And, I love to get the notifications and say that this performance is going to be audio described. And I know that I don't have to make any or take any additional steps in order to get audio description for that performance. I know I just purchased my ticket. When I purchase the ticket, I tell them that I'm interested in having a seat and we'll be accessing audio description. And that's all I need to do. There have been other instances where, that performance date and time didn't work for me. So I did reach out and contact and say, I'd like audio description for this particular performance. But I think having that set schedule is a great thing to consider and do if possible. Slide 13, modifying, basically the way that you do things to provide that equal opportunity. So if you require people to display an ID, to pick up their tickets, to gain entrance, accepting, a state issued ID where someone with a disability may not be able to get a driver's license, modifying no pet policies and allowing individuals with service animals to be accompanied wherever the general public is allowed to go within your facilities. If you require people to be there at a certain time, or if they have to line up at a certain time in order to gain access into your facility, into your venue, you may get a request for someone that may have difficulty standing for long periods of time, and they may make a request that they be allowed to sit or check in and then go sit somewhere until it's their turn to enter into your venue. And just thinking about when we talk about modifications in policies, practice, and procedures, just as a general customer service, being as customer service friendly as possible, no should never be the initial response to any request, whether it's disability related or otherwise. In the end, it may be something that you're unable to do, but you may be able to do something different that still provides someone with an equal opportunity. So you never want to say no as the initial response when you get that request. Next slide. For Title II entities, government entities, new construction, anything newly constructed has to be done in compliance with the ADA standards, as well as your state, local building code requirements. Many building codes have accessibility requirements that mirror the requirements of the ADA. But where the difference is between the building code and the ADA is that idea of program access. So as a government entity, a state or local government, you may have to make architectural changes to your facility in order to provide access. So if you're an existing theater and you don't have any existing accessible seating locations, you're going to need to make some alterations to provide accessible seating locations for individuals that use mobility devices that need the features of that wheelchair location. And then anytime you alter anything, that alteration has to be done in compliance with the ADA accessibility standards. When the ADA became effective, it didn't require state and local governments to retrofit all existing facilities in order to meet program access. But when you're talking about a cultural institution, if you're talking about you have a single venue, in most instances, you're going to need to make some architectural changes, in order to be accessible. For Title III, places of public accommodation, same requirement, new construction, must be done in compliance. Any alterations must be done in compliance with the accessibility standards. And for places of public accommodation, so businesses, private, nonprofit, the overarching requirement is readily achievable barrier removal. And that's a different standard than program access. Readily achievable means where alterations, barriers can be removed with little difficulty or expense. venues must take those steps to remove those barriers and provide access to goods and services that are being made available. All right, on to slide 16 and access coordinator. Why is it important? It's important, the point person, to ensure that your institution is fully implementing the Americans with Disabilities Act. It's a voice for inclusion on your team and being that advocate. And also training, and this is a key component, not just for the access person, but it needs to be for all staff. Because in many instances, it's your frontline people that are going to have the first contact with the public, the first contact with the person with a disability. It may be your teenagers that's doing a volunteer program with you over the summer that gets the request for materials in an alternative format, or gets a request for a qualified sign language interpreter. And this is important. This is where training is important, and educating people. And no is never the first answer. I don't know about that, but I'll check with that, and we'll have someone get back with you. And also, the coordinator making those relationships with local providers of captioning services, sign language interpreter services, where Braille materials can be found, development of accessible websites. Those things need to be, those resources need to be created and stored and shared with others within the organization. All right, slide 17 is my contact information.
Peter Berg, B-E-R-G. Phone 800-949-4232 or 312-413-1407. Email pberg@uic.edu. Website www.adagreatlakes.org.
And I will turn it back over to Hillary at this time.
Thank you so much, Peter. There's a lot of good information that you shared with us. Really some of the takeaways I get from when Peter speaks is really, it's all about assessing, advocating, modifying, and communicating. It's all those active verbs that you need to be able to really apply the ADA to your organization. Now we're going to switch it over to Kathy. Kathy Gips. She is the Director of Training at the New England ADA Center, and she's going to talk a little more specifically about Section 504 of the Rehab Act as it relates to cultural institutions and our responsibilities there. So go for it, Kathy.
Slides show black text on white background. Below is New England ADA Center logo, a project of the Institute for Human-Centered Design. Text, Section 504 and Cultural Organizations. Kathy Gips, G-I-P-S. Director of Training at New England ADA Center. Email kgips@newenglandada.org. Phone 617-695-0085.
Hi, everybody. I am a white female. I'm in Boston, Massachusetts. I'm not working in my office. I'm working from home. You can probably tell. And I'm going to talk about Section 504 of the Rehab Act and cultural organizations. And as Peter said, there are 10 regional ADA centers. And we all have the same toll-free number. So, and we all know each other. So if you end up with a question about New England, you're here, maybe you're in the Berkshires and you don't have access or something like that, Peter will refer you to us. So we are all connected. So Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act is 1973, and it was amended, but it was passed in 1973. So it's not exactly hot news. It precedes the ADA, and in fact, the ADA was really built on the Rehab Act regulations. So you'll see a lot of similarities between what I'm saying and what Peter's saying. And this is a method that the federal government often uses for social change. They will say, if you're going to receive federal money, we want you to do X, Y, and Z. And in this situation, it was that no otherwise qualified individual with a disability, and they actually used the term handicap because that was the term that was used back then, shall solely be by reason of his or her disability be excluded from the participation in, denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance, or under any program activity conducted by any executive branch or the United States Postal Service. So they don't always require it of themselves, but they did it in this situation. And as Peter said, it's all about providing an equal opportunity for people with disabilities to participate in and benefit from your services, programs, and activities. And this should be something that you're thinking of when you're establishing services, programs, and activities. So, for example, let's say you're going to do a video, and you want to make sure that it's accessible for people who are deaf and hard of hearing and blind. And you want to think about that from the very beginning, because you need to budget for it. So one of the things you should be thinking about is captioning. And you may want to do a version that's not captioned and a version that is captioned, or do a closed captioned version. Audio description is something for people who are blind, as Peter said. And so, and one of the things you want to think about with captioning is that it's going to take up space at the bottom of the video. So you really need to plan in terms of what's going to be at the bottom of the video. You want to make sure the caption's not covering anything that's really important. So you really want to consider from the beginning of establishing and creating any programs or services or activities that you are really including the needs of and requests of people with disabilities. And one of the things that we really recommend is that you have an advisory committee, you have a group that you can go to that consists of people with all different kinds of disabilities. So you're really getting input from a wide variety of folks. Excuse me. So after the regulations, after the law was passed in 1973, it took 6 years for the regulations to get issued. And every federal agency adopted their own 504 regulations. And it was really interesting. It was the longest sleep-in. It wasn't just a sit-in, it was a sleep-in. And it consisted all of people with disabilities, people who needed personal care attendants, people who used wheelchairs, people who were blind, and they actually slept in at federal buildings to try to get the regulations issued. And they were successful, but it took a long time. And the regulations that are probably going to apply most to cultural organizations are the National Endowment for the Arts regulations. And if you want to get into the weeds, and I recommend that you do get into the weeds if you are receiving federal funds, you want to read the regulations. And you can just Google ADA, you can just Google Section 504 regulations, National Endowment for the Arts, or you can pull it off the PowerPoint when it gets distributed. General non-discrimination, most integrated setting appropriate, auxiliary aids for people with impaired sensory, manual, or speaking skills. And then it really talks about different programs. And one of the things I think 504 was concerned about, or people were concerned about, was really the isolation of people with disabilities, people being put into institutions rather than getting care in their community or getting supports to live in their community. There also was a lot of concern about special education, that students with disabilities were being educated in a very segregated setting, often in the basement of the school. So there is this focus on most integrated setting appropriate, but there also is part of the regulations that allows what are called different programs, if they're necessary to provide people with disabilities a benefit or service. So let's say you're a museum and you want to set up a white glove touching tour, mainly for people who are blind, or you want to have the interpreters for a certain program for people who are deaf. And that's fine to do. You can have different programs that are focused on a particular group of people with disabilities. I know some theaters are doing performances for people who are on the autism spectrum or who have attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And so it's really created for that group of people. That's fine, but people with disabilities have a right to participate in the regular performance or the regular event, and people without disabilities are welcome to join in the events that you are creating just for people with disabilities. So we have this concept of program accessibility, And it is different. So if you're a Title III entity, if you're a nonprofit organization or a private business, you have the obligation that Peter was talking about under the ADA for readily achievable barrier removal. But that's kind of a low bar in terms of how much money you have to spend in order to make your buildings accessible. But if you're receiving federal funds, you've got to make sure your programs and activities, when viewed in their entirety, are accessible to people with disabilities. So not every facility or part of every facility must be accessible, but you need to make sure that people can participate. So for something like a school, it might be a little easier. Let's say you have classrooms on the first floor and the auditorium and the cafeteria and a science lab and the gym are all on the first floor. And then on the second floor, you've got classrooms. You don't necessarily need an elevator because you can switch around the classrooms if you've got a student who can't climb stairs, or if you have a parent who wants to be able to go to their child's classroom who can't climb stairs. But, so it's not necessarily that you have to make the entire building accessible, or that you even have to make every building accessible, but you do need to make sure that your programs are accessible to people with disabilities. And as Peter said, this often is going to mean that you have to make alterations. If you don't have wheelchair spaces in the auditorium or in the theater, there's really no other way to provide it than to create some wheelchair and companion spaces. And 504 requires that if you need to make changes to provide program accessibility, then you need to develop a transition plan. And the transition plan is a list of the barriers, like no accessible entrance, the solutions, provide a ramp at the front entrance, the date each item will be completed, and the person who's responsible for making sure that is completed. And one of the things the 504 regulations emphasize is really consulting with people with disabilities at all stages of developing the transition plan. It might be that people have very different priorities than what you think is important. It might be very different for folks with a disability or group of people with disabilities. Then the other thing you're required to do under Section 504 is conduct a self-evaluation. And that's an evaluation of all of your policies and your practices to make sure that you're not discriminating against people with disabilities, that people with disabilities are included. And then the second step is actually to modify any of those policies or practices and to take any of the steps that are necessary. And again, the self-evaluation is supposed to be really important to consult with people with disabilities at all stages. So you want to do it in the beginning to find out what some of the problems are, and then do it in the middle to develop your plan, and then maybe do it along the way to make sure that you've carried out your plan and the people are really able to participate. 504 also requires what's called notice. And I think this was a recognition that under 504 regulations, all of these things were going to be done to make cultural organizations more accessible for people with disabilities. But how are they going to find out about it? And so there's a section of the regulations that requires that we notify participants, beneficiaries, applicants, and employees that the organization does not discriminate. And the regulations, this is directly from the regulations. So the regulations talk about posting notices, publications in print or audio. Maybe it would be a public service announcement on radio to make sure that people who are blind can access that. Visual media, placement of notices in a recipient's publication. So I sort of wanted to include what the 504 regulations say back from 1979. But of course, you're going to want to think about having something on your website, making sure that you're notifying people that you're in compliance with the ADA and 504 and how to make requests. That's really important. When you have that accessibility coordinator, people have to know how to get who that person is and how to get in touch with that person, how to make the request. Social media, to the extent that you send out tweets, that you use Twitter or your Facebook page, or really any other social media you use, every once in a while, you should be telling folks that you are in compliance with 504 and the ADA and how they can access what it is they need. Again, the name of the ADA, Section 504 coordinator. So that's notice. And then the other thing the regulations require is a grievance procedure. So all of the federal agencies did not really want to be receiving grievances. They really wanted agencies and businesses and state and local governments to handle grievances and complaints themselves. So this is a requirement that there's an internal grievance procedure. And there's nothing specific about the grievance procedure in terms of what it should consist of. But we recommend, and I've seen other, some of the federal agencies recommend, that you set timeframes, that the response will be within 15 days of the receipt of the complaint, that there be an appeal process. So maybe the ADA Section 504 coordinator is making the initial decision, but then maybe the individual wants to be able to appeal that to the director or even to the board. And again, that responsible official, this is wording directly from the regulations. So designate a responsible official to coordinate efforts in connection with this section. So again, that's the importance of having the ADA Section 504 coordinator. Now, some of the resources that we've created, that the New England ADA Center has created, one is called the ADA Title II Action Guide for State and Local Governments, but it can be used really by any organization to implement the ADA.
www.adaactionguide.org.
And we outline 7 steps. The first has to do with starting your implementation. The second has to do with appointing an ADA coordinator. And we have a job description in that section of the Title II Action Guide. We have qualifications. So I think it's helpful. And then providing public notice, we have sample notices, we have a short notice, and we have a long notice. Adopting a grievance procedure, we also have sample grievance procedures. We have a short one and we have a long one. And then how to conduct a self-evaluation. How do you actually do that? Are you going to go around and are you going to interview all of the departments within your organization or your agency? Are you going to send out a questionnaire? How are you going to actually conduct a self-evaluation? And we've got forms on the website for going through the process of conducting a self-evaluation, and then developing a transition plan. And it also talks about how to do an access survey and what you should be looking for. And then we've got forms for creating a transition plan, and we have some sample transition plans. And then we recommend, so this is not part of either the ADA or 504, but we really recommend creating an action plan. So the transition plan only deals with structural changes that need to be made to your facility. But an action plan is going to be things like, one action might be develop a notice, send it to your advisory group to get feedback on it, finalize the notice, post the notice. So that's your action plan, where you really want to put in all the soft stuff that you're going to do, because it's not going to be included in the transition plan. It's really not discussed in the regulations. Now, the other publication or the other resource we created was the ADA checklist for existing facilities.
www.adachecklist.org.
And this is based on the 2010 ADA standards for accessible design. So the initial standards came out in 1991. And then in 2010, the Department of Justice issued new ADA standards. And they updated them, they changed a few things. They added a whole section on recreation. So if you have playgrounds or anything like that, you really should be using the checklist to check your playgrounds. But it's really helpful. It's not every aspect of the ADA standards, because if it was, it would be voluminous. But it really goes through 4 priorities. Can somebody get in? Can they get around the facility? Can they get to the programs and activities and services? Can they use the toilet room? And then priority 4 is miscellaneous things like water fountain, and if you have public telephones, which I don't think any of us do anymore. So that's the ADA checklist.
Thank you so much, Kathy, for going through in such good detail. One thing that I thought was really interesting that you started with, which is really important, I think, is always remembering that access needs to be integral, and thinking about accessibility needs to be integral to the planning and the beginning of things, and really trying to cultivate within your institution that it's, you have to build things with access in mind and not layer things on after the fact. It creates more complications. And thank you again for stressing the importance of having someone or a team in your organization that is available to communicate directly with your patrons and visitors with disabilities, so that we can really audit what's needed in your space, especially as you're looking at what you need supported through funding. I do want to transition now to Teresa Davis. Teresa is with the Illinois Arts Council Agency. She's going to be highlighting some general operating support grants that are available for Illinois-based organizations right now. So go ahead, Teresa, when you're ready.
Slides show blue and black text on white background. At top and left are orange bars. Top bar text, Illinois Arts Council Agency. Text, Fiscal Year 22 General Operating Support Grant, or GOS.
Hello, I am Teresa Davis, Program Director and ADA 504 Coordinator at the Illinois Arts Council Agency. I am a Black woman with braided hair wearing a purple sweater, and I'm sitting in my home office in Phoenix, Illinois, in front of a gray wall with a few flower-shaped mirrors, I believe, behind me. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the upcoming funding opportunity for organizations here at the IACA. Next slide, please. So there are two brand new components to the upcoming fiscal year 22 grant. If you haven't already noticed by the title of the slides, the first major change is the name of the grant. This grant was previously known as the program grant, but has been renamed the General Operating Support Grant, or GOS for short. I'll discuss a little bit more about this in a moment. The second change this year, we are transferring from the e-grant system used in previous years to submit applications to the new IACA Salesforce application system.
New online application portal at arts-illinois.force.com.
There'll be more information about this as well toward the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. The GOS grant. Okay, well, the IAC felt that now was a really great opportunity to change the name of the grant to align more with its focus on general operating support, specifically with the COVID-19 crisis that we've all faced over the past year and are still currently in the midst of. We realized that it has hit the arts sector very hard, and for many in the past year, programming has been scaled back or only presented online, and for some, programming may have ceased altogether. So GOS grant funds provide general operating support to establish organizations that make a significant local, regional, or statewide impact on the quality of life in Illinois. So basically, these grants are used to support general operating activities and cost. However, this is not a project-based grant. The GOS grant is a reporting grant and is based on what an organization has done in the previous year. Next slide, please. Okay, ADA compliance. So as far as ADA compliance in relation to IACA applicants or grantees, federal law does mandate that any program or service that receives federal or state funding must be accessible to persons with disabilities, as previously mentioned in this presentation. And the IACA is committed to ensuring that programs and services it funds are accessible to persons with disabilities, including those with visual, hearing, mobility, and learning impairments. The fiscal year 22 GOS grant also requires applicants to name an ADA coordinator and verify on the application that this person has completed the NEA Section 504 evaluation workbook that Kathy was just referring to. By signing an IAC application, it's important to note that grantees are acknowledging that their programs, services, and facilities are accessible, or that a plan to make them accessible is in place and being followed. Now, for the purpose of this application, an organization should look at this requirement much like it does the pursuit of excellence. Rarely is an organization ever 100% ADA compliant. ADA compliance should be an ongoing goal or pursuit, with awareness and education being the first steps. Next slide, please, Kathy. So how much funding can an organization expect to receive? We anticipate grant awards will range from $500 to $25,000, and that will be based on a few things. One being the agency's fiscal year 22 budget allocation, which is determined by state legislator and the governor. Another is the applicant's last completed fiscal year's budget. And lastly is the score given to the application during the review process. It's also important to note, once awarded the GOS grant, payments are processed through the state comptroller's office, and it can actually take up to 6 months to receive the payment. Next slide, please. So just a reminder of some important dates. The fiscal year 22 GOS application opens this Friday, January 29, 2021, and the guidelines will also be made available at this time. The deadline for submission is 11:59 p.m. on March 31st, 2021. And fiscal year 2022 GOS grant funds will support activities that occur between September 1st, 2021 and August 31st, 2022. Next slide, please. For more information on the General Operating Support Grant, the IACA will be hosting several upcoming webinars, including an instructional webinar for navigating the new online system on February 4th at 2 p.m. We'll also follow up with weekly drop-in sessions for questions every Friday in the month of March from 1 to 2 p.m. We also will have 2 webinars for the General Operating Support Grant specifically on February 19th and March 3rd, both beginning at 11 a.m. Now, these webinars will cover changes to the program, eligibility, how to apply, and will answer some frequently asked questions. More information on how to register for these webinars will be included in the guidelines when they are released on Friday. And of course, you can always visit the IACA website for further information.
arts.illinois.gov.
And I've also included my contact information as well on this slide.
Email teresa.in.davis@illinois.gov, spelled TERESA.
However, we do ask that prior to reaching out with any questions, you review the guidelines thoroughly, and if possible, please attend the webinars where many of your questions may actually be addressed. And that's all for me, so I'll turn it back over to you, Hillary.
Thank you so much. We did want to take a few moments with Teresa, Kathy, and Peter to speak to some of the questions that came in through the Q&A. So feel free to turn on your camera if you would like. You don't have to, as long as you can hear, and feel free to unmute yourself if you have a response. I'm actually going to start with one for Teresa that came in right as you were finishing. Teresa, can new nonprofits apply for the grants? And if so, do they have to be a 501c3 organization right away, or can they work towards that status while applying for grants?
Well, that's a good question. New nonprofits can apply, but we do require that you have at least 1 fiscal year completed. And you also do have to be a 501c3 to apply for a grant, an organizational grant.
Understood. And then something that came through right at the beginning was a question about for grant writers, since we are thinking about using these tools to really inform, applying for grants locally and federally. What do you think, and this is open to anyone who has an answer, what do you think grant writers really need to know about accessibility as they are writing grants for their clients?
Well, on our end, we do suggest that they digest as much information as possible, and we will again be posting this video on our site for our grantees or applicants who are looking to apply. So they will be able to have this knowledge that's been shared. And again, I did state in my part of the presentation, we don't expect that you'll tear your building down and rebuild it, brick by brick 100% accessible. Everybody does not have that ability. We do expect that you will pursue excellence in this category. We do expect that that ADA and accessibility will be at the forefront when you plan some of your programming, that, as Peter mentioned, that you think of ways that you can reach out to the community and offer services with the programming, like a signer, an ASL signer, or even audio description in some of your programming. So we do ask that you pursue excellence. And we know that you all over at CCAC have some great resources available, and even options to help organizations in their pursuit. So that's what we expect, along with naming a coordinator and actually going through and completing that Section 504 workbook, which will make you more aware of what you need to do for your organization legally.
Thank you, Teresa. I think one of the big things that we have to be thinking about as we are approaching funding, whether locally or federally, is that there are a lot of resources, and it's about taking that time to think about what are the resources that we can access prior to help inform our process of creating this grant application. Where can we bake access in from the start, and who are our resources locally in the community that could really help us inform this process and make sure that we're reaching the populations that we haven't reached before, or are really looking for opportunities. I will close us out with this one question that I thought was interesting. Just in terms of creating an accessible website, that was referenced a few times throughout the presentation today. Are there some specific resources that you would recommend, Kathy, Peter, for someone who's just starting that process of really where to start with that?
I'm glad to speak to that, or I'm sure Peter can, because he's a screen reader. So there are international standards, WCC3 WCAG, Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And we're glad to send Hillary the latest version, and she can share them with everybody. But those are the guidelines that we recommend.
Thank you so much. A big thank you to our panelists today, to Peter, to Kathy, and Teresa for sharing your knowledge and making yourself available. Contact information will be shared. And good luck, everyone, as you're looking at this next landscape of funding, as we're going into a lot of continued virtual programming and thinking about how to make those as accessible as possible. Please look to your community and allies for resources, and the Chicago Cultural Accessibility Consortium as well does have a lot of resources. So we will post things, and we hope you have a good day, and thank you for joining us.
White text on a black background. Accessibility compliance for grantees. Presented by Illinois Cultural Accessibility Network. For workshop resources and more information, visit chicagoculturalaccess.org. Presenting speakers. Moderator, Hillary Pearson, ICAN. Peter Berg, Project Coordinator of Technical Assistance at Great Lakes ADA Center. Kathy Gips, Director of Training at New England ADA Center. Teresa Davis, Program Director and ADA 504 Coordinator at Illinois Arts Council Agency. Workshop Accessibility. Real-time captioning and ASL interpretation provided by Alternative Communication Services. Video editing, captioning, and audio description by BridgetMelton.com.